Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. I am your host, Rachel, on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
I'm your other host, Joe.
And he is Instagramless. But you can follow our podcast account on Instagram at Love Meets Literature. So here we are officially on episode 2.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, so exciting. Joe is recording over there across from me with a cat sitting on his lap.
Yeah, so if you hear some meows, that's what's going on here.
Yeah, Peaches wants to be the center of attention, but unfortunately, we don't have a microphone small enough for her.
That would be adorable, though.
It would be so cute.
Can listen to her meows and she could commentate on everything we're talking about.
I know, but unfortunately, I don't think she reads.
No, I don't think so.
But she is an iPad kid.
That is true. She does like watching TV and videos and those little fish swimming around on YouTube videos. She loves it.
It's hilarious. We put usually one of our phones on the ground with one of these fish videos on it, and the cat will stare at it and she'll attack it. And it's the funniest thing ever.
It is hilarious. Quite often she will press buttons and try to like accidentally switch the video or something.
She'll like butt dial people.
Yeah, that's what I'm scared of her doing. Sending a text out to somebody or something.
I would cry if that happened.
It would be very funny though. Imagine getting butt dialed by a cat.
Right? Imagine explaining that to somebody like, hey, sorry, didn't mean to call. That was my cat.
Or she leaves a voicemail and it's just a cat meowing in the background. That would be so confusing being the receiver of that phone call.
Oh my. Peaches is looking at me now like, what? I would never do that. But we all know she's a devious little kitty sometimes.
Very true.
Aside from Peaches, let's jump into it, I guess. This week, we are going to be doing some deep dives into books that we've read that we recently loved. And I am so excited to talk about mine. You have no idea. What I read was just insanely wild, but I loved it. And I just need to brain dump all of it onto you. So I hope you're ready for that.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited.
It's crazy. And it might be a book that I might have to coerce you to read just because it's simply the most ambiguous genre that I've ever witnessed.
So it doesn't have like a defined theme.
Not really. There's a little bit of everything in this book. There's some mystery, some romance, some more thrilling elements. I guess one would call it contemporary fiction, but I feel like contemporary fiction doesn't even begin to describe the complexity of this book.
Well, it sounds very interesting. Now I'm even more excited than before about the deep dive.
I know, and the title of this book will be revealed in a little bit, but what are you deep diving on this episode without saying the title? Let's leave it an air of mystery for everybody out there.
The book is fantasy, sci-fi, kind of. I would say it leans more on the sci-fi aspect, and it essentially is a detective book. It follows the main character who is essentially trying to solve these situations and crimes that pop up. It was very exciting and extremely action-packed, and it moved at a great pace, so I really enjoyed the whole thing.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about it. And just so you all are aware, deep dive episodes will include spoilers. So if these are books that you are planning on reading in the future and you want to know nothing about them, when we start talking about them, we will tell you so you can close your ears and just don't listen to us. Mute us if you want. I don't care. We just want to talk about these books and have fun talking about them. So I do not care if I spoil something, just so you all are aware. I know I'm being very blunt right now, but it's the truth. What can I say? Like, spoilers are very subjective. And honestly, sometimes spoilers make me want to read a book even more because I want to know how it got there.
Right, like the lead up to the spoiler, I guess, or the big climax or twist or whatever it might have been.
Right, exactly. So the book I am bringing this super complex, ambiguous genre book is Summers at the Saint by Mary Kay Andrews. Joe, what are you bringing?
I am bringing this. I already kind of talked about this on the last episode, which is the Old Chrome box set by I.O. Adler. It's actually 3 books in one, which it's the Seraph Engine, the Atomic Ballerina, and then A Haunt of Jackals, but it's all combined into one.
Oh, yes, the 3 books that have super unsettling titles.
They are a bit odd. They do make sense for the story. And the reason, in case anybody's curious why it's a box set, is because they're actually all pretty short. The entirety was only like about 600-ish pages. It's a little bit less than that, but because they're broken up into individual books, it reads really quickly. So it makes sense to tie them all together.
And from my understanding, there are more than these 3 books to the series.
Yes, I actually found it out when I was reading the third one that there's, I think, 8 total right now. So there's the 3 in the box set and then 5 additional after that.
So what I'm hearing is you're going to have to read them, and then we're going to have to come back, and I'm going to have to listen to you talk about them.
I am going to have to. These ones were very interesting that I am very intrigued to read the next 5.
Well, that's good. It just shows that reading is fun.
Reading is fun.
Yeah, you see, I've turned you on to reading, and it's amazing.
No, I can't stop.
Before we go into all the endless book talk, there's going to be so much book talk this episode. I thought it would be nice to give a little recap on how our wedding planning is going, because obviously the thing here is that we're engaged, we're getting married, so I feel like it's only fitting that we bring some of that into this. I think wedding planning is going well. We've got a lot of stuff done.
It feels like we're making good progress on everything.
We are. We've got a lot of vendors lined up, and my head is swimming with information, and it's a lot. And
especially flower ideas now after those consults.
Oh my goodness. The flowers, I had no idea how complicated flowers could be. Like, these florists are asking me questions that I don't really know the answers to. Like, what kind of flowers do you not like? What kind of flowers do you like? Are you allowed to do this in the church with the flowers? And so on and so on. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know flowers. If you tell me the name of a flower, I have to Google a picture of it to see if I like it or not.
Right, pulling up the plant ID on the app or whatever, just trying to figure out what anything is. I don't know flowers at all either.
Literally. And who knew flowers could be so expensive? Like, they're plants from the ground, and you're charging me like thousands of dollars.
Right, thousands. 3 zeros on that.
But it's going well. Wedding planning is happening, and, honestly, I'm not as stressed as I thought I would be, but it's still a lot of research and time and money and effort and just, telling everyone what date it is, even before you send out the save the dates, just so they don't plan anything between now and when the save the dates are sent out, because, people these days, they like to plan all their vacations and stuff a whole year in advance.
Yeah, that's how you get the good deals and good discounts.
I guess so, but also our wedding is also about a year away. So we're like on par with the people trying to plan their spring break. So I feel like I got to get those save the dates out ASAP.
Oh yeah, I forgot spring break is around that time, so that makes actually a lot more sense.
I did order all of the save the dates, and I was originally going to wait until September to send them out, but I feel like I might push that to July or August, just in case, so people don't forget. It's been a lot of word of mouth over here. Yeah, it's this day, it's this day, it's this day. But no one's actually like putting it in their calendars, so it just makes me nervous that they're going to forget.
Right. Out of all the days to forget, that's the one I don't want people to forget. So sending it out early is probably going to be the better bet.
I know, otherwise I'm like, sorry, it looks like you got to cancel your vacation to come to our wedding.
Yeah, you better cancel that to come to the wedding.
But I'm very excited, and I'm happy that it's smooth sailing so far. Hope it stays smooth sailing.
Agreed. I don't have any wood to knock on, but definitely knock on wood.
Getting into the books. Summers at the Saint by Mary Kay Andrews is probably one of the more interesting books that I have read so far this year. I mean, considering it's only May, I still have a lot of time to read other super interesting books, but this book just stood out to me so much because it did include so many elements of so many genres. I guess if you're ready, I'm gonna start diving into it.
Go for it.
All right. Summers at the Saint has a very beachy vibe to it. It's set on an island that seems to be off the coast of Florida. It's not really said specifically what island it is. It doesn't really have a name, but they do mention Bonaventure, which is actually a city in Florida. And I did look it up on a map because I needed to, I don't know, see where this island was that they're on, because I mean, I know there's like the Florida Keys and stuff, but other islands, I have zero concept of other islands. So I looked it up and it seems like near Bonaventure, Florida, there is like a little causeway that takes you over the ocean or whatever, some body of water, to a little strip of island, but I couldn't find out what that little strip of island was called, but there were establishments on it on Google Maps. I want to say this book could potentially be inspired by that, but I can't say for sure. Basically, this book is set on an island off the coast of Florida at a resort called the Saint Cecilia, which everyone shortens to the Saint. All of these people are working here during busy tourist season. And lo and behold, this hotel is having a staff shortage. A staff shortage happening right as busy season is about to start. Can you imagine? I would literally be in shambles.
That sounds extremely nerve-wracking for everybody involved.
It definitely comes off in the book that way too. We have the owner, Tracy. She is the owner of the Saint, and she has worked at the Saint since she was a teenager. She actually ended up marrying the Saint's heir, Hoke Eddings, and he died. So now she owns it. She has a lot of beef with the rest of his family. It's so frustrating as you read this book, like, because you're like, why does his family have beef with her? Like, she's his widow. Can't you people just respect her and whatever? It's weird. There's a lot of shady stuff going on, and more and more is revealed as you keep reading. So Tracy realizes that the Saint is slowly going under because, well, her head chef quit in their most exclusive restaurant. So she has no chef, and apparently a few of the staff went with the chef. So now her restaurant's got no staff. She can't really find new people to work at the Saint because there's no affordable housing in the area.
Well, when you're on a small island, it's probably hard to afford a house there.
Well, yes, but at the same time, I feel like these areas should know that there's people working here supporting their economy, but they can't afford to live in their economy.
That's true. There's a lot more moving parts there, though, than we can hope to combat. At least the owner of the Saint can hope to combat.
Yeah, I know. So she's understaffed. Her guests aren't happy because she's understaffed, and there's really nothing she can do about it. But she does have this brilliant idea to actually convert like an old golf cart shed into a staff dormitory, which is actually genius. They were describing it, and I was like, if I worked at a hotel for the summer, if I were some like 19, 20-year-old, I'd probably do it.
It sounds kind of like a hostel. I think that's what those are called, like a little board to stay in.
Yeah, but the way this was described, it was described so nicely. Like, it was, everyone got their own room. They were all single rooms, and they just had a shared bathroom, shared kitchen, shared living space. I mean, it seemed like a pretty sweet setup.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cross between a hostel and a hotel.
A little bit, yeah. So aside from Tracy, the owner of the Saint, we have Charlie, who is the Saint's general manager. Now, he just gives off like skeevy, sketchy vibes from the moment you meet this man. If there was ever a person to be more wary of, it is Charlie Burrows, the general manager of this hotel. He has worked for the Eddings family for years. And again, the Eddings family is the family that started the Saint. They are super rich, like rich beyond belief. He's also like into this like theft ring going on around the hotel, which that's important later. So remember, theft ring. And then we have Rick, who is Tracy's skeevy brother-in-law. Like literally this man, I hated him the moment I met him. Just like Charlie, it's like mutual feelings there, which makes sense that, they get along so well. But Rick is basically doing this dirty business of trying to get his sick father, who is Fred Eddings, to change his will when he's mentally incapable of stating that he wants his will changed. Like, he comes in with this whole camera crew and they go into Fred's little garden house at the Saint, where he's there with Parkinson's disease. And his nurse is there, and Rick just goes in with his TV camera and is like, this is what we're doing, Fred, and whatever. And he has this like little lawyer who I don't believe was ever really a lawyer. They do all this changing to the will and stuff. Also important for later on. Any commentary so far?
I'm just storing everything for later. I'm keeping all these mental notes over here.
There's a lot of characters in this book. So like brace yourselves, because there's even more coming. And then we have Shannon, who is Tracy's former best friend. They were lifeguards together when they worked at the Saint. This is where things also get messy. When they were lifeguards at the Saint, a very, very horrible, tragic accident happened. And this kid named Hudson ended up drowning in the Saint's pool. Now, nobody blamed Tracy for it, but everyone blamed Shannon for it. And Shannon ended up getting fired. Even though this drowning was no fault of the lifeguards, which we will get into in a little bit, but they fired Shannon because they couldn't fire Tracy because Tracy at the time was dating the young Hoke Eddings. She was dating the heir to the hotel, so they did not fire Tracy. Shannon hates Tracy. She feels like her best friend betrayed her because she didn't say, hey, don't fire Shannon. But Shannon is still living in the area, so she's still around. Then we have Livy, who is Shannon's daughter. Livy works at a restaurant that is nearby to the Saint. Tracy meets Livy when she goes into Livy's restaurant with her niece Parrish, which we will get into Parrish in a little bit. Tracy ended up poaching Livy from her place of work because the place was so sleazy. Like, Tracy noticed the general manager, being rude to his staff, and service was kind of bad, and she felt bad for Livy. And then Livy admits that the cook and her boss have harassed her, and that just solidifies her reason for wanting to work at the Saint because it is a safe place to be, or so we thought. So Parrish is Tracy's niece. She is Rick's daughter, and she was going to go to Europe this summer for a school thing, but Tracy coerced her into working at the Saint. Tracy basically blackmailed her and said, hey, if you come work at the Saint because we're understaffed, I'll pay for you to go to Europe another time. And, Parrish was like, okay, fine, whatever, Aunt Tracy. So she goes to work at the Saint because they're understaffed, and she's working in guest relations. So Parrish meets a ton of interesting characters at guest relations, and she ends up keeping a notebook of all the guest complaints because a lot of the guests are having the same complaints. And it seems a little sketch to her that nothing is being resolved. And this is important later. Again, everything is important later. 90% of the book is knowing the characters and following what they're up to. And then at the end, we get this whole big thing that happens. It's kind of like, I guess I would describe it as the game of Clue.
That's almost what it's sounding like. I was going to make the joke about I need to get my pin board out and start tracing everything together and making sure I'm keeping all track, because that's what it seems like.
I am shocked that I remember this book in so much detail, but it's one of those books that sticks with you. We still have more characters to go, by the way. There's a lot. I warned you. We have Felice, who is the Saint's new head chef. She becomes really good friends with Livy, and she turns into this sort of hero at the end of the book for crazy reasons. We'll get there. But she really doesn't like the fishmonger and the food suppliers that the Saint is using. And she's told Tracy and Charlie multiple times. And Tracy says okay, Felice, you're the head chef. If you want a new fishmonger or whatever, because this fishmonger was literally giving them rotten fish. What kind of fishmonger sells you rotten fish?
A bad one.
Yeah, a bad one. And which is why Felice wanted a new one. But Charlie, again, skeevy Charlie, the general manager, says, no, you can't change the suppliers because we've been working with them for forever. So Felice is in a pickle and she has rotten fish and, she can't serve rotten fish. So something fishy's going on there. And then we have KJ and the fishiness continues. He is an Ivy League college dropout who is always in trouble. And he starts working at the Saint because Skeevy Rick is friends with his dad, and KJ's family are also longtime members of the Saint. So Rick gave him a job underneath Tracy's nose. And when Tracy sees this kid, she immediately is like, I do not like you. And she has good reason to not like him. More on that later. And then we have Garrett, who at the beginning, Garrett seems like the most charming person ever. He is Tracy's favorite waiter at the Saint. Tracy loves him. But honestly, the more you get to know Garrett, the more skeevy he becomes. He's definitely got some dirty business going on. All he wants to do is go to clubs and party and do drugs. And he's just not a good person. And there's this part where he sort of gets together with Parrish, and it's just, that part is like the turning point for Garrett's character arc, because that's when you realize he is not who Tracy thinks he is. And it just makes you feel bad for Tracy because this guy is literally like putting on a facade for her. So it turns out he's also part of this like theft ring that's going on at the Saint. Again, more on that later. And then finally, out of our main characters, we have Waylon, who is Hudson, the kid who drowns, older brother. And he comes to the Saint to get answers on what really happened that day because things just don't add up. He's like, how did he just drown if like nothing happened? He was a good swimmer. This Hudson kid, fantastic swimmer according to everyone in his family, but he just ended up drowning. Something sketchy's going on there. But, in the midst of his investigation, he falls in love with Tracy. So that's the romance part of this book.
So we finally come full circle. We've got all the different themings and genres there.
We do. And, as I was reading this book and getting to know the characters, I felt like I was getting whiplash because it kept pulling me in so many different directions. But I loved it. Now that we are acquainted with our characters of Summers at the Saint, we have a sequence of horrible events. First off, the staff is living in a dorm room on Saint property. They're all friends. They're all friendly together, but Parrish hates the boys. She cannot stand KJ and Garrett. The boys do not clean. It's disgusting and dirty, and it's just bad. So, like I said earlier, Parrish decided to go out with Garrett one night, and it turns into a disaster. Like, literally disaster. Parrish storms off and she leaves and she goes. And I guess Garrett is like all upset that she left and whatever. So then everything seems fine and dandy. We're kind of at a lull in the story where everything is nice. There's not really anything eventful happening. But then the Beach Bash happens. And the Beach Bash is this event that goes on every year for members of the Saint. And everybody's involved. Guests, staff, everybody. So everyone mingles and they all help out. And then afterwards, there's an after party for the staff. When coworkers get together, it can be a bit wild. I have my own stories from when I worked a retail job. When coworkers get together, it's nothing but gossip and just shenanigans and getting to hang out with these people that you never hang out with otherwise. So for the Beach Bash after party, bosses aren't invited. So Tracy's not there, Charlie's not there. Literally not really any like full adults are there. It's mostly just your 20-something-year-olds. So everyone's drinking and they're doing drugs, and it's not a good time for everyone because Parrish actually gets like uncharacteristically sloshed and she's super high and she ends up falling down some muddy slope, I guess, and she dies. So Parrish is dead. And that was the one point in the story, well, one of many points in the story where my jaw dropped. I was like, You killed off a main character.
The fact that perishes though is a little on the nose. Just gotta point that out.
I didn't even think of that.
But to kill off a main character is bold.
Mary Kay Andrews really made Parrish perish. That's hilarious.
That was the first thing that I noticed.
Parrish is dead. And the next morning, KJ and Garrett go out to where the party was held and they clean up while they're quote unquote looking for Parrish. They're not really looking for Parrish. They're just there to clean up, and that's sketchy. The police end up getting involved once the Saint security finds Parrish dead in this ditch or creek or wherever she ended up. Livy turns into our little amateur sleuth, and she decides that Parrish's death is like, it makes no sense. She's like, something intentional happened to Parrish. So she gets Felice involved, and they find Parrish's little blue notebook where she kept all of her guest complaints to see if they could find any clues. They fall down a rabbit hole of investigating and find out that there's a theft ring going on at the Saint. Charlie and Garrett find out that Livy and Felice are digging into their business, and they decide it's too much for them. So they decide to commit arson to the staff dorm. And they blackmail KJ into joining in on it because KJ is gay. And they were going to tell everybody that KJ is gay if he didn't help blow up the dorm. Literally in the book, the chapter, like one of the chapters just starts with the word boom.
I just gotta say, the jump from theft to arson is pretty dramatic.
I was reading this book really late one night, and I was going to stop reading, but then I got to the chapter that started with boom, and I was like, what is happening right now? And then I read about all this arson, and I'm like, what? I'm sitting there like, my eyes are like bulging out of my head. Like, what is happening? Like, Mary Kay Andrews, are you okay?
It almost kind of reads like a Criminal Minds episode.
A little bit. Like, you got all this character backstory and whatever, and then something bad happens to someone and it's totally out of character for that person to be like how she was at the time. And then, arson.
Right.
I feel like the wildest Criminal Minds episodes are arson related.
Yes, that is extremely true.
Felice wakes up in the middle of the night to a bunch of smoke in the dorm. She can't get out of her bedroom, so she smashes a window open with a lamp, and then she runs around the building to smash Livy's window open with a lamp, and she drags Livy out, and they make it to safety. Hurrah! Felice is a hero. So then somewhere in this, Shannon and Tracy make up and they're friends again, yada, yada, yada. While all this is happening, Waylon is going around asking questions about Hudson's drowning at the Saint 20 years ago, and he discovered that it was anaphylactic shock due to an undiagnosed peanut allergy, because a third-party medical lab had to do an autopsy because the county where the Saint is didn't bother to do that. And it turns out someone in a red Corvette 20 years ago gave him peanuts, and it turns out the owner of that red Corvette was our skeevy friend Rick. Rick was really the cause of Hudson's drowning, and for some reason that gives Tracy and Shannon a whole lot of peace. Also during this time, Tracy's lawyer discovered that Rick did something fishy with his dad's will, and also informs Tracy that Livy is Fred Eddings' daughter. Yes, that's right. Fred Eddings did something horrible to Shannon, Livy's mother, a very long time ago, and that's how Livy was conceived. So I told you, it just gets wilder and wilder. So Livy is actually an heir to a portion of Fred's estate when he dies. And Livy ends up becoming a millionaire, and she ends up working at the Saint. And that's just kind of how the story ends. Oh, and there is this one crazy scene where Garrett is like sort of fessing up to the arson and KJ fessed up to the arson, and they're all trying to get away. But then Garrett pulls a gun on Felice in Tracy's house. To me, that scene was kind of very overdramatic, but also at the same time, you're kind of like, whoa, because these three guys, Charlie, Garrett, and KJ, tried to get away with the arson, but they didn't. Charlie was caught crashing his car while he was trying to flee. KJ basically fessed up, and Garrett was caught when he tried to kill Felice.
That really does feel like a Criminal Minds episode, though, with the whole evolves into getting more and more sort of, well, I think they call it devolving, but it's very interesting. It almost does feel very fitting somehow.
It's their karma.
It is. It is their karma.
This book ended on a very high note, with Livy being part owner of the Saint, and her and Tracy are running the business, and business is booming again. They're no longer understaffed. They got full staff, full business, and Tracy and Waylon are having a baby, and all is well.
Yay. What a nice ending.
Yeah, and I gave it 4.5 stars. I really liked it. I have to say, Mary Kay Andrews books are a hit or miss for me, but this book makes me want to dive more into her backlist and read some more of her books. I actually surprisingly really enjoyed the dramatics of this one. It seemed like I was watching a movie or like multiple episodes of a television show.
It does very much, like the way it's laid out and the way it seems to read, it does feel like a movie pretty much.
I highly recommend this book. What I just said was very spoilery, so like maybe you feel like you don't even have to read the book anymore, but honestly, the book is a journey in itself, and there's so much more detail aside from what I just described here. If you're looking for a book that is a beach vibe, it's got a little bit of romance, a little bit of mystery, it's got those dramatics, it's got, some amateur sleuth, it's got some murder mystery. It has something for everybody. So if any of those sound like something you would enjoy reading, I think you would really enjoy this book. And that was Summers at the Saint by Mary Kay Andrews.
Fantastic recap.
Thank you. I am very much looking forward to your Old Chrome deep dive. Those titles still very much intrigue me, and I have to know how they connect to the stories.
So I'm going to be talking about the Old Chrome box set, which is by I.O. Adler. The first book of the box set is called The Seraph Engine. The name comes from the train that they're on is the Seraph Engine, which is supposed to connect two of the main cities. The first one is River City, and it connects to Seraph. This is important to the plot. The whole entire box set actually takes place in Seraph for the most part. The Seraph Engine, the first one, takes place on the desert just outside of it. So the main setting for all the books is futuristic, sci-fi-esque, but the important part of it is that humanity has left Earth and populated the rest of the solar system, and then they have come back to Earth after it's kind of been like desolated and empty, and now it's mainly, or pretty much almost all of it is desert, and they're trying to do a lot of like repopulation and greenhouse stuff. So there's a lot of mention of that in the books, and like most of the things that they eat are like plant-based because they are just populating with greenhouses and stuff like that.
Humans that went to space and then came back.
Yes.
Wow.
It's quite interesting. And they have like, a lot of them have like augments. So they have some sort of like internal, imagine like Google glasses or the Apple glasses, but they're integrated into your brain. They all have like hookups of some kind or electronics connected to a web or something. And the old Chrome is a reference to the main character, Miles Kim, who is mainly artificial. He's got a lot more than most people. Most will use artificial skin to kind of cover it up and make them look still human, as where he doesn't cover any of his up. So he's very robotic, and he's often a turn off to most people, and they tend to look away from him. But the first book is Miles Kim on the train to Seraph. The important part is that he's taking a trip to Seraph after he has cut himself off from the military network. So he worked in military police for 20 years, and then he's retired. He's used essentially a jailbreak to cut his circuits and his gear off from the net, and they are chasing him, and they're wanting him to come back because he is still their property, essentially, because they've rebuilt him. He's traveling to Seraph to see a butcher that is going to cut him up, take his parts, sell them, and then he is going to give the money to his son, Dylan. However, during his trip, the train that they're on gets attacked by what they call metalheads, which is essentially like your bandits in a fantasy story.
Can you imagine if the metalheads were actual metalheads?
Like actually had a metal head.
No, like metalheads, like they liked metal music.
Oh, that would be very funny. That's now my headcanon. I like that idea. So the bandits attack. They essentially derail the train, knock it off, and they break into the cargo hold, steal a bunch of important stuff, and then leave. And so Miles, being retired military police, is kind of accidentally inserting himself into the investigation, into helping and everything like that, because they haven't received any help. The train station, for some reason, is not responding to the train being down, and none of them are able to get a connection on their phones to be able to call anybody. After it's attacked, he ends up meeting Marshall Barma and Dawn Maridi, who become two of the other main sort of important characters, not only throughout this book, but throughout the entire box set. The train is then attacked a second time, but this time it's way more sophisticated and way more geared at eliminating the people that were on the train rather than stealing any cargo or anything important. Miles realizes that there's something way bigger at play here and decides to start doing his own investigation and figuring out what's going on. He ends up tracking the spider bots that were used to attack the train. From there, he finds a mining town. It used to be very populous before Earth was left, when there used to be a bunch of platinum and gold mines. Now it's like almost essentially completely abandoned, with typically only a few here and there people doing stuff. Really, the main important parts is he kind of explores the area and the town that he gets to, and he meets this man that was running a tavern, and he realizes that there's something, again, bigger at play here, and the person that's running the tavern is not actually who he seems to be. He's essentially being kept prisoner there, and it turns out that there's this guy called the host that is running essentially the whole town. So the marshal and Miles go and investigate the town, and after realizing that this host person is sort of in control, they go and decide to try to track him down. And they eventually find the mine where the host is being stored. They break into his little vault, and there's these pods where these people are being kept in. And what they find out is that not only was gear stolen from the train, but there was also the train conductor was abducted, and so was an engineer. And they both get held into these pods where their memories are being transferred into that of the host. So he's essentially taught himself to gain the memories of all these different people. And what he was going to do with Miles was essentially convince him to be a part of his regime and his trade, and have him recruit more people and all that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting concept, and that's where it really ramps up the sci-fi aspect. The end of that book is essentially them defeating the host and breaking most of the people out of the pods, and that really sets the stage for understanding the characters. The one important thing to know about that first book is one of our main characters, Dawn. She ends up convincing Miles that she was a representative from River City looking to collect on him. Like, she was kind of a bounty hunter, so to speak. However, at the end of the book, she sneaks away into one of the ambulances, and she convinces the drivers to go to this very specified location, where she then picks up some gear off the ground, and then she's nowhere to be found. Becomes very much important later. The story ends with Miles finding his son Dylan, and obviously not going through with his appointment to get all chopped up. There's 2 other books. In the Atomic Ballerina, this actually takes place nearly exactly after the first book. On the train from the first book, really the only other important character was the woman named Beatrix Fish. She's the owner of one of the businesses that owns the train. She actually hires Miles to look for her abducted daughter. Naturally, Miles's first question is, okay, well, who took her? Or do you know who took her? And it turns out to be the father, who is estranged and they're divorced and they don't really talk. The mother, Beatrix, is convinced that the father lured her away using his henchmen and promises of ponies and gifts and things like that.
So, did Miles become like a private investigator?
Kind of. He didn't mean to do it intentionally, because the whole point, and this becomes a reoccurring theme of people asking him, I thought you were retired. However, he essentially continues to do private investigation. So right after being hired, Miles runs into somebody who is drowning in a fishing pond, and then he helps the guy run away because he's being chased by the people from the greenhouse because he wasn't supposed to be there and he was stealing fish. This lovely person ends up being Tristan, who becomes sort of his, I guess you'd call it, best friend throughout the book.
I wonder if the fish that he was stealing was fresher than Felice's fish from the fishmonger.
Maybe. I'm not sure. They do grow them there on New Earth, but it's hard to say.
It was probably fresher than Felice's from Summers at the Saint.
I would hate to try either of those fish. So the other two sort of important characters for this book is, of course, the girl who's abducted, which is Agatha Fish, and then her older sister, Kitty Fish. Kitty sort of helps Miles throughout most of his investigation whenever he comes to Mrs. Fish's house, despite even when Beatrix eventually gets very mad at Miles for sticking his nose in places that don't belong. As I was mentioning, Miles was traveling with Tristan, and they were driving around, and they go to Mr. Fish's house, who is supposedly the man who took Agatha. And they go, "Hey, did you take her?" And he goes, "Yep, I did."
Wow.
And then you would think that the story's over, but then Miles essentially says, "Well, court mandated is supposed to be Agatha lives with her mother, so you have to give her back." And Mr. Fish insults him and threatens him and tells him no. Naturally, Miles breaks into his house later that night. Oh, by the way, when Miles broke into that house, he did it really well. Like, for somebody who's supposed to be military police, he knew exactly how to break into that house and did not hesitate a single time.
Well, shouldn't military police know how to do that kind of stuff?
I mean, yeah, but it almost made me wonder if there was like another side to his past that they don't ever talk about, but it was just so smooth and so calculated. But maybe that's just good training.
Ooh, maybe a deeper look into his backstory will sort of pop up in another one of the books.
That'd be very interesting. I would like to know more about him. So after he breaks into Mr. Fish's house, he essentially goes to where the bedroom is, where he'd expect Agatha to be, and it turns out that she's not there. Mr. Fish then comes into the room after noticing that his house had been broken into and sort of confesses that not only did he take Agatha, but she's been taken from him. So she's actually missing, and she was actually kidnapped. This is where the introduction of the militia comes in. One of them is called the Red District Militia. The second one is the Yellow Tigers Militia. And then the third one is the Sheriff. And they all serve different roles throughout the city. Like the Red District Militia is mainly for more of like your private security, or works more for like the 1% kind of people in the town. They're very much like almost for hire mercenaries, as where the Yellow District is, or I'm sorry, the Yellow Tigers is your classic sort of just police. Like they're the ones that are just there for the whole town. And then your sheriff side is like really high profile cases. They're almost kind of like the FBI in a way. So from discovering that Agatha was actually missing, Miles's next objective is to sort of find out where she went. He starts to get help more from Kitty, who he starts to realize actually does care very deeply for her sister, despite putting on this front that she doesn't. With her help and with some security footage and the help of the maids from Mrs. Fish's house, they sort of discover Agatha has been taken or coerced or something by this big guy. So at this point, Mrs. Fish has fired him. Mr. Fish has made it clear that if he keeps sticking his nose in places, he's going to be harmed more than he's already been. The militia even tell him, "You will be arrested if you do all this kind of stuff," and Miles doesn't care anyway. During all this time, there's a robbery at Mrs. Fish's house where, and this is where the connection of the book comes from, a ballerina music box is stolen. So he ends up using that as sort of the connecting lead because it was a very specialty one. They're all like handcrafted and it's very hard to find. So he goes to a toy maker who makes that kind of stuff and he finds out that music box, this ballerina music box, is powered by essentially an isotope, radioactive isotope, which is where the atomic ballerina comes from.
That's so weird.
It's designed in a way because it's using nuclear energy, essentially, it will run forever, is the concept.
And maybe all this sci-fi stuff just goes over my head, but I'm like, why would anybody make a ballerina music box run on nuclear energy?
So that way it never dies. You wouldn't have to get more batteries for it.
Yeah, but isn't that music box like giving you cancer?
I mean, probably, but they don't care. They're super rich. So then, after he essentially discovers the location of the music box, this is where the story does something similar to the first book, where it just moves very quickly. He goes to a pawn shop, he finds out who took her, and goes and confronts the Church of the Sands. And one of their clergymen is who had taken Agatha. And it turns out that he didn't actually take her. She went of free will because she really likes the church and its preachings and things like that. And it's also revealed that the reason Agatha ran away from home was for being neglected by her mother, and her mother only really using her as like a trophy.
So, how does the atomic ballerina lead into the next book?
There's a bit of a time gap. So all of the characters sort of come back in the third book, which is A Haunt of Jackals. And it starts by the marshal calling up Miles and telling him that he needs his help on a case.
Miles just can't catch a break.
No, and keep in mind, he was supposed to come here to, get butchered and then give his son a bunch of money, and now he just can't stop working.
I mean, I guess working is better than getting butchered.
That's very true. It also is another reoccurring theme that Miles can't seem to stop working even when he tries.
What does he do in A Haunt of Jackals?
So it starts with the marshal calling him and telling him that he's got a case that he wants Miles to take a look at. So Miles agrees and goes to visit essentially the outskirts of the town where these shipping containers. And inside one of the shipping containers, there's the Yellow Tigers Militia's CEO. He's the highest of the high on there, the top dog. He's laying on the ground dead, followed by two of their underworld syndicate bosses, like these two guys that are essentially like Al Capone levels, like they know they're bad guys, but they can't do anything about it really. So Miles takes a look. From there, Miles and the marshal sort of try to keep investigating where they can. They eventually find the son of the Yellow Tigers leader, Lucian, and he essentially approaches him, interrogates him, and tries to get as much information out of him as he can. And the son, being the son of a powerful person, kind of knows how to play his cards and to make sure that he's, not just spilling everything and all that kind of stuff. From there, Miles takes it to the marshal's headquarters and essentially attempts to interrogate him. However, the lawyer and the Red District both show up and sort of put a stop to that. The Red District this entire time also wants to interrogate him, but they can't because when the lawyer shows up, she's very good at what she does and prevents anything from happening. There's not really any big plot points until Miles sort of gets jumped by the agents again. And from there, he ends up getting detained due to it kind of happening in like a public setting. He gets detained by the Red District militia. And when he leaves, there's something that's mentioned by some of the militia that seemed off with him. And they kind of all, after that, he kind of gets fired by everybody and Marshall lets him go. But he can't just let it go. And there's people mentioning things and talking, and it just keeps stirring around in his head. So he decides to go out and investigate the original crime scene one more time. And he realizes that based on the different shot patterns on the walls, that not only was there another person who they believed to be the son, there was actually somebody else physically in the container who also got shot. But there's very clearly wasn't a fourth body. And he discovers a panel in the floor that he goes into, which leads to essentially this underground bunker. He opens the door for that, and on a cot hooked up to some IVs and has all of these bloody bandages all over her is Dawn, the character from the first book. Yes.
Oh.
The girl who originally poof disappeared after she picked up that secret little item is laying there.
Oh my God.
That was the twist that I was like not expecting that at all, and I'd kind of forgotten about her a little bit. So she's laying on the bed, and Miles comes over to her and starts essentially trying to see what's going on, and she starts freaking out, saying that they're going to come back, they're going to come back. Miles, not knowing what's happening, just decides, okay, I got to get her out of here. He also realizes during this time that when she had been put under, which is why she had these IV bags and stuff like that, she had been like doped up with all this medication, that somebody was harvesting her internals and her augmentations and her parts and everything like that, and essentially stripping her, butchering her. So then he pulls her out to safety and gets her to a hospital, and then he goes back to find out what happened. And it turns out that there was these two salvage yard guys that found her after the shooting, took her down into that secret room, and called a butcher who was a doctor at one of the nearby hospitals of kind of like a more slum like neighborhood. From here, Miles, obviously being very upset about this because he's grown fond of Dawn and was like a good friend with her, starts essentially attacking these guys and gets the doctor to show up to where he chases the doctor down. And it turns out that the little item that Dawn had picked up and the item that the doctor now claiming he doesn't have anything to do with or can't find was a transponder. And this transponder is supposed to be able to contact satellites that are orbiting New Earth. And this whole kind of concept, and it's not really, it's touched on a little bit in the books, but you don't really notice it until this point, is this entire time they mention these satellites that are orbiting the Earth sort of absent-mindedly. And it turns out that they're really important because there's actually people on those. They're like space stations. And nobody can actually leave this Earth unless you can contact the space stations. And so they find out that Dawn somehow got a hold of a transponder that can be programmed to talk to these satellites, and in theory would allow people to leave Earth once again. And then it's kind of revealed that Dawn obviously is not some sort of just normal bounty hunter, that she's essentially like sort of like a secret agent, I guess, like in the most dramatic sense, and she's kind of off the grid. And then from there, Miles is sort of damaged and beaten up. Dawn brings him out of the house to keep him for the most part alive, but then she just leaves. Miles runs into some not so do-gooders in the neighborhood, and they beat him up, and he's left on the ground. He wakes up in the hospital, and the before mentioned doctor is working on restoring him and keeping him alive. The doctor actually realizes that Miles had made an appointment with him to get butchered so that way Miles could sell the parts and give it to his son. So this entire time, this doctor that he was mad at for butchering up Dawn was actually supposed to be the same doctor that was supposed to butcher up Miles so he could sell himself.
Wow.
That was the other part that kind of made my jaw drop a little bit because I was expecting something like that to happen because of the mention of the doctor and the butcher, but I just didn't realize that. I didn't connect the dots until they did it for me.
I feel like that meme right now of the lady who's kind of just like looking all confused and then all the like math numbers are in front of her face.
Oh, yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
My head is spinning.
That's I think a little bit fair, especially with the mention of like transponders and the sci-fi elements. In the actual book, the plot is sort of one half of it, and then the action scenes are definitely the other half. And I didn't even want to really go into those because I can't do them justice. They did a very good job of making them feel realistic. It wasn't like one of those things where somebody falls on their back and they use their right arm, and then somehow in the next scene they're still using their right arm, or they're doing something else with their right arm now. Like everything had a reason. They talked about movement and which hand was holding what and all that kind of stuff without getting dry, but at the same time kept it really intense and very fun.
Well, that's good. So, what audience would you recommend these books to?
I think I would recommend it to anybody who likes definitely the sci-fi genre. I thought it was much more sci-fi than any others, but also it did a very good job of the detective sort of
Mm.
genre or trope or whatever you want to call it. It was very analytical and the decisions were sometimes spontaneous, but they were still like fun and they made sense and it was just very interesting overall. But that's kind of who I would recommend it to.
What were the names of these books again?
The first one, so the whole set is the Old Chrome box set. The first book is The Seraph Engine. The second one is The Atomic Ballerina. And the third one is A Haunt of Jackals. And they're all by I.O. Adler.
Awesome. Good. Just to clear that up, because when I was searching for old Chrome box set the other day to like add it to our social media, it just Google kept popping up with pictures of old Chromebooks.
Yeah, it's definitely not an old Chromebook.
Like the computer, like used Chromebooks is what Google gave me when I searched it. So it's good to have the author's name after that.
Yes, definitely. Don't want somebody to actually buy a Chromebook looking for a real book.
Can you imagine they like want to buy these books, but they buy a used Chromebook instead? I feel like you got to be pretty stupid to do that though.
I think most people, I would hope most people would notice, unless you were just like really late night shopping or something like that.
I guess so. But that was very interesting to hear about. I myself am not a sci fi reader. I've tried to read sci fi, so getting like the rundown without me actually having to read the book was nice.
Well, I'm glad. I gave you a little taste without, I guess, having to read the entire thing.
I hope everyone out there enjoyed listening to these deep dives of these few books. I know they could be very spoilery, but again, spoilers are subjective. And hopefully, if you did make it all the way through and you haven't read these books yet, hopefully you still will consider reading them because I still think there are a lot of details within those books that we did not touch on, even though we did go fairly in depth. So, Summers at the Saint by Mary Kay Andrews and the Old Chrome books 1 through 3 by I.O. Adler. I just have to know before we sign off, what are you reading this week?
This week, I have started the next book in the Witcher series, which is The Time of Contempt.
And what number is that? Are you on book number 3?
I believe this is book number 4, if I am remembering
Ooh.
correctly.
You're breezing through that series.
I am. It's very good and it's very sort of, not going to say easy to read, but it just flows so well. It just feels so natural. And yes, it is the 4th book. I just double checked.
Oh, I was wrong once again, but that's okay.
What are you reading this week?
So I am reading a couple books. You know, I can't just be a one book at a time kind of girl. I'm participating in a buddy read on Instagram of the second Percy Jackson book. So we're reading Sea of Monsters and it's really good. It's moving really fast so far. And so far, I'm liking it more than The Lightning Thief. And then I'm also reading A Lady's Guide to Selling Out. That one is interesting. I'm not sure if I'm actually enjoying it, but I refuse to not finish it, mainly because it's one of those books where I keep thinking it's going to get better, but in reality, I don't really know if it is. It's kind of like all over the place right now, and is just following this one girl. So it's very character driven, which I don't mind. But the character we're following is like a little scatterbrained and all over the place. And I feel like we're just getting her stream of consciousness. So we'll see how that ends up going. But that's what I am reading this week. Hopefully, our books end up being good and we end up enjoying them. And I am looking forward to chatting more about books and wedding things and life and cats and all that fun stuff next week.
Yes, me too.
So I hope everyone picks up a good book this week, do something you enjoy, and we will talk to you soon. Happy reading.